Hello and welcome to Choose FI. Today on the show, we have our good friend Jamila Sufrad back on the podcast. It's actually been over 5.5 years since she last joined us. And she is the author of the brand new book, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, and is the host of the Journey to Launch podcast. She just has a remarkable story. And I'm so curious to catch up with her to learn how her FI journey has been going since, again, the early days when she had just made a massive change when we last spoke with her to leave her full-time career. So it should be a great catch up. And I really want to dive into her book because it's absolutely phenomenal. So with that, welcome to Choose FI. Jamila, welcome back to Choose FI. It is so good to see you.
Hi, Brad. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this should be fun. So, okay. The last we chatted with you was incredibly, or obviously on the podcast, the last time I chatted with you was episode 73, which came out in April of 2018. Obviously, can't expect you to catch us up on your entire life in 30 minutes, but let's go back to where we were then, which was, I think you had just maybe made the decision to leave your job, but you hadn't quite done it yet.
Yeah, so if it aired in April of 2018, that was just before I gave birth to my third child in May. And I was on a maternity leave after that, but I had already planned to not return to work after my maternity leave. And so I left and exited the workforce in the fall of 2018. So it wasn't public by the time we probably spoke, but we may have spoke offline about my plans.
Gotcha. So, right. Obviously, that was a major turning point in your life. Did you think of that, or do you think of that in hindsight as a FI move, as an entrepreneurial move? Like, how do you conceptualize that decision?
Wow. So my initial journey into financial independence and plan was to ultimately quit my job and reach our version of financial independence where I didn't have to work in 7 years from my starting point, which I was 33 at the time when I declared that. Fast forward a couple years into my journey, I realized that I couldn't sustain all the things. So the job, the commute that was an hour and a half one way, journey to launch, which by then I was doing on the side, and then the kids. So I was starting to have more kids. And when I got pregnant with my third, I decided to change what the journey looked like because initially I thought I could just withstand it all and just do it for the money and quit when I turned 40 years old and hit my goal. But becoming pregnant and then knowing that, I would be a mom of three, I didn't want to live that lifestyle anymore. So quitting my job is what I call actually stage 4 of the 5 journey stages that I talk about in the book, where I've reached work flexibility. And so this decision, depending on how things go with my income, can delay the true path to financial independence because it impacts how much we can save and invest as a family, or accelerate it because if I do really well, that's more to save and invest. But ultimately, whether or not it takes me shorter or longer to get to my goal, I'm enjoying the path more because I control my time. I control what I do for work. I'm comfortable. I'm happy. This to me is the benefits of financial independence, the freedom without all the money needed, which is where I want people to get to.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think really people like us have helped push the definition of FIRE and financial independence from that old mindset, that really limiting, this is just like you said, maybe I could stand it. I could hold my nose and just like wish away the next 7 years, right? To now you're living a life that you actually want to live into. And like that's a sea change if you think about it, Jamila, right? Like that's a massive change from 7 years ago. And what was the prevailing thought in the financial independence community?
Right. And I think if we're not careful, which is where I started to get to, was that, how we look at people who are only working to retirement so that they can enjoy the last couple years of their life, and they're wasting away really what they could be doing and this life they want to live. I think the same thing can happen in the FIRE journey if you're not careful, because even though it's a shorter timeline, it's not you're waiting until maybe 60 or the traditional retirement age. You still might be putting off living your life and enjoying your life for 5 or 7 or 10 years, which is similar to the same thing you are trying to avoid. And so the goal to me on the journey is to enjoy it and to find a sustainable path to where, depending on the phase of life you're in, the season you're in, your responsibilities, you may choose to hold off on the pleasures of life and discretionary spending. And in some ways, you want to maybe indulge in that. And how does that impact your journey? And is it worth it is all the things that I've been exploring and explore in the book.
Yeah. So find that sustainable path. I think my ears perked up at that. I'm sure a lot of people listening, their ears perked up as well, because isn't that the real rub of all this, right? Like, isn't that the hard part? Is how do I find that sustainable path? Because I think a lot of people find they get so excited about it, Jamila, right? Like, because
Yep.
this is a superpower. It's life changing. Like, nobody is denying that. This is a superpower in life. It just plain and simple is. But you can get over exuberant, right? Like, okay, how do you find that sustainable path?
All right. So, depending on where you are in the stages of reaching financial independence, I do think it is necessary at some points to be more intense. And I think being in discomfort. So, when I first discovered the movement, I was in this long commute. I was in a job I didn't love. I just had one kid at that point, and I was so motivated to get out of that situation. So, I saved and invest. So, that was the couple of years that as a family we saved and invest $169,000 into our various retirement accounts and taxable accounts. And as I kept going on the path, I realized, wait a second, there are some trade-offs that I'm making here that are not sustainable. And I want to also live my life and spend more money in a way that serves us as a family living in New York City with three kids and a husband who, he's happy to come along with me on this journey, but he's not into finances where he's reading blogs and listening to things. So for me, that's changed. And I've slowed up on my gas pedal to the intensity of financial independence, but that's because I'm comfortable and now in this journey or four stage of the five stages. So depending on where you are, that discomfort and that excitement that you first get when you hear about financial independence may serve you well in the beginning because it can get you out of the earlier journey or stages faster. Meaning, if you have to pay off debt or you have to get to stability and just like be able to pay your expenses without going into credit card debt and build these habits, that serves you well to be so excited. And then as you kind of go further along on the path, it might also serve you well. And some people enjoy the intensity and they keep it up, which is fine. But you might find that you say, like, this is not sustainable. I'm not happy. How can I make some changes? And that's where you readjust. And I think it's important just to note that just because you start out one way doesn't mean you can't change your mind or strategies. You can choose what works, again, in the season of life that you're in for you.
Yeah, I love that. That's so critical. You can change your mind. It's okay, right? Like, just because you set one path and one set of goals doesn't mean you can't readdress it. And Jamila, I don't know what kind of cadence you tell people to maybe go back and look at those goals, look at, like, do an annual review. I mean, is there some cadence that you recommend people do that?
So I think the initial plan that you set for yourself when you find out about this is, typically there's a hopeful wish, like, you want to reach financial independence. I know for me, I said in 10 years or less or in a shorter time frame. And then I did the math and realized, oh, like in order to reach that, I have to get really intense. So there was this initial plan that I created and tinkered with in a spreadsheet. And then as I started to make changes and saw progress, I would come back to that depending on life events that happened. So when I was now having my second kid, how would that change how our life would look? And that plan, how would that plan change? When I had or was pregnant with my third and then made the decision that I'd quit my job, how would that change our pathway to financial independence? So for me, and what I recommend for a lot of people is it can be, at a set time, but also just at life events. So for me, it was having kids that allowed me to go back and change or look and reevaluate what this plan initially was.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I like that. And you said a handful of minutes ago, quote, our version of financial independence. And I'd love if you could compare and contrast like that original, hey, I'm at this crazy intensity. This is what that version of financial independence looked like. And then you said, then it changed what the journey looked like and maybe what today's version of that looks like.
So initially, my husband, he wasn't going to quit his job and retire early. He was happy to still work. He's a New York City school teacher. And he said, I would continue to work, but our income and where I was with my income covered more than half of the household's income. So me walking away from my job would mean he would work, but we would still need money to help supplement if we wanted to keep up a certain lifestyle that we had. And so our version of financial independence was, okay, when I made that declaration in 7 years, I'd quit my job, that I would quit. But if I chose to work again somewhere else or have a business, I'd do that, but I wouldn't have to actively work. We can live off of his income and supplement that with our investments that we had built up over the years. And, ultimately, I would prefer not to have to touch any investments, but we were flexible with what our lifestyle looked like. And now moving forward, my income now as an entrepreneur covers some of our expenses. And then we are still saving and investing towards financial independence. That timeline has moved out. So my reaching it by 40 years old, I'm currently 40 years old.
Right, right,
And
right.
so it's interesting because I find that there's a lot of freedom and options, and even this career path that led me to writing the book has afforded me more freedom than I even envisioned when I first started this plan. Because in my head, I didn't know what I wanted to do, which was fine. You don't always have to know what you wanted to do, but it was more of a limited view because I didn't know all these pieces would fall together in this way. And so even though I failed, and I think the title of my episode was about failing forward. I think it was something about failing forward. And it's
Yeah.
funny because I did fail, quote unquote, at my financial independence goal of reaching it at 40, but I know I gained something far more valuable, which is a more sustainable path to financial independence and taking longer, maybe, depending on the numbers and how our lifestyle looks, but being able to enjoy it a lot more because of this time and this freedom that I have and putting work out into the world that I truly love. So my version of it has changed, and I feel even more empowered on this journey. And I know we talked about this before we pressed record, but staying true to the journey for me means not to lose sight of still wanting to reach financial independence. So that is still the goal. And even though it may take a little longer based on our lifestyle, I still want to reach that. And I have to remind myself that so that I know my enough points. I know how much I want to work versus not work so that I can keep adjusting my plan as I move forward.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that really we've seen this intermediate time frame, right? So, okay, 7 years ago, you found Phi and said, "All right, in 7 years I'm going to be done or I can be done." And you're at that point. You're at that 7-year point and like you said, you haven't reached Phi, but it sounds like you've reached so much more, right? Which is actually really cool.
Yeah. So the other concepts in the book. So one of the things that I was not struggling with, but I know that for some people, especially people who are not as keen to join in on this journey, is how it will impact their lifestyle today. So, I'm going to save and invest majority of my income or as much as possible, but what about enjoying today and the lifestyle that we want? So I have this thing called Ghac Lifestyle Levels, and it relates to how much of a lifestyle or how much you spend, and then that equates to how much you need to reach financial independence. So technically, and the guac levels go from 1 to 5, 5 being the most indulgent and luxurious, and you spend a lot, and 1 being the most frugal. And so if we were more at a guac level 1 or 2 lifestyle, we've reached financial independence technically with our numbers. If we were at that lower level of spending. But that's not sustainable. Again, we live in New York City, Brooklyn. We have 3 kids. There's 9, 7, and 5, and we're just not as frugal in a lot of the areas of our life anymore. And so our guac level is more of a 3, 4, right? My husband would probably like it to be more of a 4, 4, 5, but we're more around like a 3, 4. And so I
Yeah.
think it also depends on just what your lifestyle is, because if we lowered our lifestyle level and how much we spent, we could reach it a lot sooner, or we would have reached it already, but we don't want to do that right now. And part of that is if I hated what I did or my husband hated what he did, I think we would lower our lifestyle level so that we can have time and energy back to be with our family. But he enjoys what he does. I currently enjoy what I do. And so it's worth it to work and also delay maybe what this time frame looks like.
Yeah, I really like these guac levels. This is one of the things that I highlighted in the book. So, I guess in the Phi world, we probably would be okay. Guac level 1 is maybe lean Phi, maybe
Yeah.
severely level 5 is fat Phi, maybe even level 4 might be a fat Phi kind of thing. And then, so it sounds like you said, you're definitely at a level 2 at minimum of Phi. So you more than are at lean Phi at this point. So you're well along
Yeah.
your journey, right?
I mean, but I just can't imagine living lean Phi the
Exactly.
way with our preferences and lifestyle right now.
Which is great. And that's what's so beautiful about Phi, right? Like, is this really is an intensely personal thing. And yeah, you said something in there like, I really like what I'm doing now or for now. And I know
Yeah.
you said that almost as an aside, and this is not to take away from what you're doing by any means, obviously, but those are maybe the two most critical words, the for now, which is, hey, there might come a day where this just overwhelms me, or I just don't want to be doing this anymore, or fill in whatever blank. And you have options, right? Like you have so many options in the sense that, like you said, you live in a very high cost of living area. You obviously, by any measure, would be probably guac level 4 or 5 if you move to a lower cost of living area. So it gives you options. And I think that's the nice thing is you don't have to give anything up, right? I mean, you and your family, it's a testament to that. You can live in an ultra high cost of living area. You can live at this fat fi guac level 4 and enjoy what you do and enjoy your life. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think the thing here, though, us being able to live at this higher guac level or desiring to reach this in financial independence is a function and privilege of our income. So, there are a lot of components that you need to work on to reach any financial goal or financial independence. I talk about 6 of them in the book that comprise the FI formula, which is our income, expenses, assets, liabilities, which are tangible things you can measure, and then habits and mindset, which are more intangible, even though you can kind of measure your habits in a way. But really, each one of them are very important part of the puzzle in working together to get you to your goals. Habits and mindset, especially because I think that allows you to enjoy the actual journey that you're on and then make things more sustainable. But really, your income, most of the people that I've interviewed who have reached a certain level of freedom or financial independence, part of how they've been able to do that is because of their income. And even if they chose to spend less, they were able to optimize and use the difference of their income to invest and save towards their goals. And so I just think it's important to note that income is important here, because if we weren't earning as much as we were earning, or we didn't earn or set ourselves up in our 20s to do what we're doing now, then living at this lifestyle level would be harder because we wouldn't have the foundation in place. We wouldn't have the income to be able to do it. So I think that's just important to note, especially I just know that people are listening at different income levels, and, income and having enough of it to do all its jobs, because it has a lot of jobs to do, is a privilege and something that a lot of people need to work on if they do want to live that higher lifestyle level.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think this is yet another thing that has really changed to a large degree in the financial independence world, in that I think for a very long time, it was always, like you said, there's two sides of the equation, right? There's the income side, there's the expense side. And I think we only focused or mainly focused on lowering expenses. And I think that leads to a negative mindset. It leads to a deprivation mindset potentially of cut, optimize, right? And that's all there is. And that said, I think being smart with your spending is important. And I will essentially go to my grave with that. And I think that's probably the low hanging fruit of, hey, you just found FI or you just found personal finance, and maybe you're in the red every single month. Like, I think the easiest way for most people is still to change things on the expense side. But to your point, you cannot just ignore the income earning side. And there are ways to optimize that. There are ways to negotiate your salary. There are all these different things. And I'm curious, like, so someone comes to you, they just started listening to Journey to Launch, they just read your book, and maybe they're that person who is, hey, they're living paycheck to paycheck essentially. What are the first couple of steps you would tell them to get on a better financial path, like in the here and the now, the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. So I would tell them, let's evaluate to see where you currently are, because of those components, a lot of them, they're measurable, the 4 of them. And then you can still assess your mindset and habits. So my question is, do you have a true income problem? Do you have a true expenses problem? Do you have a mindset problem, habits problem, or a combination of something of those, or all, which is fine. I think most of us have one or all of them at some point on the journey. And because sometimes they don't know, you have to look at the numbers, you have to look at and assess your lifestyle. And so assessing the numbers means really taking a look at what your income is and what you're spending. And there are some people who do not earn enough. Like, they are at the cusp and they're not earning enough to take care of basic needs. Even if they might be indulging and spending in other areas, they're not earning enough and not making a real livable wage. And they have demands on their income because maybe they're taking care of family, they have daycare, they have life. And so, yes, they can still optimize their expenses, but if they're already doing that, then it's most likely an income issue that they need to work on. And then there are some people, when they take a true look at their income and expenses, they are earning a good amount of money, but it's it's like a bucket with a leak in it. It's just not being optimized. Their income is not even being optimized to help get to their goals. And so that is just a true maybe expense problem that they need to and then can leapfrog their way up the journey or stages or through financial independence quicker than that person who needs to spend some time working on their income. So I think it's really a matter of assessing and being honest with what the issue is, and then also looking at your mindset and habits around those issues, because while a lot of things are outside of our control and there's systemic issues and things that need to be changed, in government and in economics, some things are within our control. A lot of things are within our control. And so what is that? What is our mindset? What are our habits? And are those impacting how we earn and how we spend? Because then that also helps us to make different decisions around those things.
Yeah, I love how mindset and habits come into this. And of those 6 items you list, like those essential components, right? Like, okay, income, expenses, liabilities, assets, those make sense. I think those are obvious to everybody. But yeah, mindset and habits, like, I mean, I would argue once you have just like the bare bones of your finances down, like 80 to 90% of winning at this game comes down to mindset and
Oh my
habits,
gosh.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fuel booster. It's the intangible. I'd say it's like the exponent of the formula. You can income minus expenses gives you hopefully money left over, but adding habits and your mindset as the exponent, like that, takes it to the next power. It allows everything you do to go to the next power. Because I find that people who do have, even if they don't have the tangible yet, so they are not making as much as they like, or they're working on their expenses. So things are not perfect on that, but they have the drive or the will and the knowledge to try and to keep trying, even if things may not be working in their favor, that they have more chances of making it through and making it further than the person who, yeah, I'm earning, good money, but I don't have the mindset and habits around helping to use that money to get me somewhere. I really think it's something that needs to be talked about more. And I know that people are talking about mindset and habits more in this space, but it's so important because we just automatically want to get to doing. Like, I want to make more, I want to spend less, let's just do it. And I think a lot of us know what we should do. You can Google how to budget, you can, Google what you should say in an interview. I think we know these things and it's free information for the most part that's out there. It's why aren't we doing it? And I think if we can get to that and whatever blocks or therapy needed or just practices needed to help us with that, I think that goes a long way, a longer way than we think.
Yeah, agreed. And you talked a couple of minutes ago about really essentially changing the locus of control, as we call it. So a lot of people like to externalize that, like, oh, they are impacting me, right? They, the government, they, the whomever. And that's clearly the caveat being there obviously are major issues in this world. I'm not trying to gloss over that. There are things that are deep seated and have been around for decades, hundreds of years, et cetera. That said, I think what you were alluding to was an empowering mindset that you can do on a micro level, right? Which is, hey, I can exert some control over my life. I can make positive changes that impact me and my family, right? And I think that's what being on the path to maybe that's to me the number one benefit, that I'm not in a state of fight or flight anymore. I have financial assets that if something happened, right? If I got in a car accident or something happened to my house or fill in the blank, like I have financial assets that it's not a catastrophe. And I think when people can just get that stability, Jamila, and it's not, and you talked about this in the book, certainly, of like where you are, financial freedom versus financial independence. Like you don't have to be at a point of financial independence to have power from your money. And I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. So I think financial independence in its truest form and reaching it is a very audacious, big goal and a very privileged one to, go on. And when I say privilege, it doesn't always have to be a negative thing that people are just like, oh, I don't have privilege. Like everyone has a level of privilege. I have a level of privilege being that I was able to be raised here versus some of my siblings who had to stay in Jamaica, or I have more privilege than my mom did because, she came here at 20 years old with nothing and really no internet. She had to really figure it out. And I had this privilege of being born with a mom like the mom I had and all these things. So anyway, I think that in general, this journey to financial independence is audacious. It's big. I call it the moon goal, that, you shoot for that moon goal, but it's really, you can't fail I believe, on this journey, because even if you set your sights like I did at, or I want to reach financial independence in 7 years and have X amount in our investment accounts, and then I get down here in 7 years and we don't have that amount, but my life looks different and I'm happy. If I didn't start this journey, I wouldn't be writing a book or have written a book. I wouldn't have a podcast. So I just think even if you fail and you don't get to your desired number in the time frame that you've set, that, instead of 2 million that you wanted to have, you have 400,000, like that is better than you having zero because for not starting the journey. And so I do feel that as much as we are right now talking about the external number, that who we are and what it requires of us, like what the journey requires of us, is the true asset or goal. Because you are going to have to be introspective. You are going to have to challenge yourself and the norms and the things you used to know and do. You are going to have to learn discernment and learn concepts that you never thought of before. And all that is building you up to being your best asset, meaning you are now in a position to make better decisions, to withstand when things don't go right, even if you don't have all the money, even if you're still in debt. The fact that you have a plan to pay it off and you're working on it. I just think we are focusing or tend to focus on that external number, but so much of it is the internal journey and who we become. Because I could not have told you, even when we spoke, how many years ago was it, 5.5 years ago, that I'd be here. I knew that this is something that I wanted one day to do, like write a book or have a podcast that people consider successful. But I didn't know that this was what my life would be. And so I think so many people just, if they start the journey, would be surprised how quickly things can change for them. And it's not just the money side, but the inside too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so fascinating to look at your life over what in the cosmic scheme of things is a fairly short period of time, right? 7 years, and just like how dramatically different it is. I think about that with my own life, right? Like 10 years ago, I started richmondsavers.com and I never could have imagined that it would lead all of the things that have happened in the subsequent years. And I think that's why it's wild to forecast like what are our lives going to look like in 10 years? And it's impossible to know, of course, but I think like you were talking about optionality, right? And just position of power and strength. And I think that's what FI does for us. It gives us those options.
And this is why mindset is so important, and habits, like these intangibles that I talk about, because, some things you just don't know. Like you don't know what you don't know yet. You don't know that you should even want it yet because maybe you don't even know it's an option. But I know there's someone listening to this podcast because I used to be that person in a commute with no blog, no podcast, or when I did start, didn't know anyone in this space. But I used to listen to people who had established brands and platforms or podcasts and would hear stories from other people. And, even though I couldn't relate to every single thing, I would take in what I was learning. I'd be like, like maybe I call it hyperlinks. I talk about this in the book that, our life is one big story, just like we read on a web page. There are hyperlinks in that story. And sometimes you click on it and it takes you to, because it's an interesting word or thing they reference. And then you go there and then you keep clicking. Sometimes the hyperlinks lead nowhere. They're not interesting. Sometimes we ignore the hyperlinks and sometimes we click on it and we find something. And so I felt that in the beginning of my journey, I just kept clicking on the hyperlinks. If I heard someone on another podcast that I thought was interesting, I would be like, oh, let me go check out their blog. Oh, they did this strategy. Oh, this teacher has 2 retirement plans that they have access to. Oh, my husband's a teacher. Let me just look into how we can use that. And so for people listening, right, you have to first believe or think that things apply to you, even if they don't seem like that. Like, what can you take from a story or what can you use to help you on your journey? I truly believe that if the thought exists in your head, if you have a dream, it was placed there for a reason and it's something worth exploring. But I wouldn't have explored these pathways, exploring wanting to reach financial independence, maybe one day starting a podcast and writing a book, if not believing that when I heard other people do it or that dream within my head, that it was possible for me. So I think that's why it's such an important step to believe that things are possible for you, because if you don't believe it, then you won't even attempt or try the journey.
Yeah. What a cool visual that is to think of life essentially as like a series of hyperlinks and all the information you take in. Like that, it's funny because that's how I think of the info that I take in. Not in hyperlink, but like it's just all kind of swirling around in my head and synthesizing. And like it's more like the phrase the talent stack that we've used here so many times. Like when you have just all of these various ideas and skills and all these things just again synthesizing and alchemizing in your brain, like you just never know where it's going to lead you. And I find that like exhilarating about life, that like you can just learn anything. You can be connected to whomever. And like, and let's be clear, like, obviously we happen to be two podcasters talking, but like, this is the podcasting is so silly. Like, it has nothing to do with anything in essence. Like, we're not telling anyone listening, like, you have to build a blog or have a podcast. Like,
Nope.
that's the furthest thing. But it's about just being open to new experiences. It's about being open to new connections with people in your own life.
Yeah. Why not you? Like, why not you? Why can't you have the life you desire? I always love this quote. I don't know who said it, but it goes, if one can do it, you can be two. If none has done it, you can be one.
Huh.
And, really, it's like if someone else can do it, potentially you can do it too. If no one has done it, but you thought of it and it's an idea, why can't you be the first? And you really have to have some optimism and a little bit of delusion, not in necessarily a bad way where you're using it negatively, but to really believe that, even if no one in your family has been debt free or was good with money or they haven't done things the way you would have preferred, that you can be the change or you can do it differently. You have to believe that about yourself.
Yeah, totally, totally agreed. And so you mentioned a couple of minutes ago about your husband, right? And being a teacher and having different options for saving and such. And so I wanted to talk about him for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind, because
Yeah.
you mentioned before earlier in the conversation that he's, quote, happy to come along with me on this journey, but like he's not the personal finance person in the house, right? But also last time we spoke, again, on way back on episode 73, you talked about him doing like everything he could to earn extra income. I think it was like being a coach in summer school and maybe like morning teaching, something like that. Like, talk to me about him and his mindset and how he thinks about all of this.
That is so interesting because we find ourselves, or he is finding himself having to make some of those choices now about the value of his time and energy in exchange for money. So he's a teacher, he's a phys ed teacher, and because he was an athlete, it's like perfect for him. So he's just really athletic and good at teaching sports and all those things. So he also coaches on the side. Now, before we had kids, he did do all the things. And even when the kids were younger, he'd do summer school and after school, morning school, you name it, which is very helpful to our income. But now, as the kids have gotten older, they've started their own sports and they right now have chosen basketball, which is up his
Oh,
alley because he played basketball. And so there are a lot of practices or things that we're doing where he is helping with, right? He's helping on those teams that they play on, he's taking them to practice. But he's been approached recently to coach a team for his school. But yes, in doing that, it would bring more money, but it's also would take away from his time and what he can do with his kids. And so I think even he has these opportunities to make more, earn more, but he's realizing that the trade off is not always worth it when it comes to the time that he can spend with his kids or with us as a family. And I think it's not as he's also an immigrant, so his parents are Haitian, just like I'm Jamaican and my family's Jamaican, and you're just taught to work. Like if you have an opportunity to make money, you don't turn it down. And so I think a lot of times his natural response is, why not? I'm not really, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2 months. Why not just take it now? Not understanding or knowing. And now he is realizing the trade off of what that looks like. And so I've seen him come to his own decision of, nah, this not, even though it's more money, it's really not worth the trade off of what that takes to earn it. So maybe I'll turn that down.
yeah, that is it's hard, right? Because you're basically at that point saying like, okay, I could earn X number of dollars per hour, and that's like definitive, right? As opposed to, okay, but I can't keep doing that with all of these other things I have in my life. And was that basically, were there conversations between the two of you like about that, or did he just kind of come to that realization on his own?
So I think hopefully the good thing hopefully he would agree to this statement. The good thing about our relationship is that we really try to give each other space to make our own decisions because I want him to be happy. So we actually had this conversation recently over text. He was at school and he said, yeah, they offered me this position. He was like, I don't know if I should take it. What do you think? So I said, well, I don't think it's a good idea, but I want you to make the decision. So maybe just ask yourself these questions. And so I like gave him a list of questions that maybe he could consider to make sure that he wanted to make the decision and it wasn't based on me or something that he actually was giving up that he wanted to do. And so some of the questions involved just thinking about the time. Like, do you really want this or do you want it because it was offered to you? I think
Mm.
oftentimes we have this within ourselves that something is offered and we think we should take it because, we don't want to let other people down. And hey, why not? Where it's like, there's an opportunity cost here. What does that look like? Because if it wasn't offered to you, would you actually go pursue it outside of that? And then, it was a list of questions, but then the other one involving his time was, let's just say, because part of him saying no to this is so that he can spend more time with his kids and pour into them. And so I said, let's just say the kids don't do well with basketball. They give up in a couple years. They, whatever. They don't take it seriously and it's done. Will you regret not taking on this additional job because it was something you could have done instead of that? And he didn't answer. So I didn't, I'm not requiring him to tell me his answers. But, for me, if I had to answer the question, I would say I'd want to enjoy the journey of watching them try at something, even if it doesn't pan out. And so that's worth it. Even it's not about the money that I missed out if it's not an opportunity I really wanted. It's more about spending time with my kids and helping them fall in love with something that I fell in love with, and then them deciding if they want to do it or not. So I think we have been having those conversations, and as they get older, maybe that will look differently as they get more autonomy. But for anyone listening, who has kids, it's just like, especially at these ages, it's such a important time because that like we have like before the oldest one is like 9 years from now, he's going to be maybe in college. So what does that look like where we can spend this time with them? And that's more valuable than any money.
Yeah. Goodness, I hear you, and yeah, it's wild when you think about how quickly these kids grow up. And yeah, I've quoted this many times here on the podcast, but the article "The Tail End" by Tim Urban on the Wait But Why blog is just a remarkable visual presentation of a finite lifetime, and really every year, literally every year, from 0 to 18 that you spend with your kid, that's about 5% of every minute you'll ever spend with them forever, which is
Oh,
wild.
don't
So
make me cry, Brad. Don't
no,
make
I'm
me.
so sorry, Jamila. I'm so sorry. But right, like it does that. It obviously, I think that's the first reaction. But then you say, oh wow, I really need to maximize this time because when they turn 18, that's 90% of the time I'll have ever spent with them. So I damn well better make it valuable now, right? So I think that's important. And I loved in there how you were talking about, and I'm going to paraphrase this terribly, but bring it back to something on the other side of the ledger, which was, hey, your husband, like, if he wasn't offered this job, would he have sought it out in essence? And I've actually heard something interesting, like on the other side, maybe more on like the minimalism side and like acquiring things of if something you owned or if everything you owned broke or got whatever lost or fill in the blank, there was a fire or something, like, would you actually replace that thing? And I found that to be such an interesting way to look at just the stuff that you acquire in a lifetime. And it's like, how many things would I actually go out and repurchase again?
Right. Well, it's funny you said that because I do remember I wrote a line like that in the book where you know how sometimes like if someone breaks up with you, it's a relief. Well, back in my dating days or just thinking about my friends that are dating, where it's just like they're not even sad that it happened because it's something they deep in their heart like they wanted to happen or they weren't happy. And just like a job where if your boss came to you and said, you know what, I'm like letting you go. And of course, there's other emotions that come with that, but it's a sense of relief. Then what does if you can imagine those scenarios happening for different things in your life, would you be really sad or relieved if that thing walked away from you or
Right.
severed ties? Can also open up or show you in terms of what you actually do want in your life. Because I think a lot of us do things out of obligation and because we said we would. But when other people maybe back away or take away that opportunity, it shows us if it's something we really wanted or if it was something that we were just using as a placeholder or pacifier to not go after the things we really want.
Yeah, Jamila, I like that. So find out what you want. I think that is just so broadly applicable to every aspect of the FI journey, right? And one thing that I thought was really especially well done in the book was chapter 7, which is setting financial goals. And I think sometimes goals get talked down upon or denigrated, maybe like in favor of systems. And I certainly do that as well because I think systems are really critically important. But goals are just having a North Star, right? Like something to shoot for, something that, okay, this is the overarching theme of what I'm doing here. And like you said earlier, you can reassess that and you can come back to it. I think that's really critical.
Yeah, I think in general with goals, we all I think also your personality depends on how you set goals. Because I know people who every top of the year they set the goals, they know the steps, and I give that in the book for that personality type that likes to do it that way. And then I think there's a certain level that you have to be flexible with what your goals look like. Because if you have a goal, let's say to buy a house, right? There's different levels at which you can buy a house. It can be like, if we turn it back to lifestyle, it can be that really nice guac level 4 or 5 house that you really desire, or it can be what's a reasonable house a condo maybe that I would still enjoy and be happy with. And so I'm gonna say, like, what's your minimum goal? That way, if you don't hit the higher goal that you set for yourself, just hitting the minimum would make you happy, or you would still be experiencing and enjoying that moment. So
Yeah.
as much as it's great to set goals, I think it's important to look at there's a diversity of goals. There is a level at which you can experience a goal via your lifestyle level, and you can adjust, like you said, as you go, because as we both know, as you continue on the journey, your idea of what you want will change. And you may think, you know what, it is worth it to have the nicer house. That is what I want. And I would work longer and harder for that for whatever reason. Or you might take the opposite approach and say, you know what, it is not worth that trade off. And so I'll take the condo or the smaller house or somewhere low cost of living if it involves me having more time and energy.
Yeah. Yeah. It is very, very important to be introspective and just realize, okay, this can, will, and does change, but that's okay. That's all part of the journey. Right. So, Jamila, thank you for coming on. Obviously, Journey to Launch is the podcast that's been going on for 6+ years now. The book is coming out December 5th, 2023. Your Journey to Financial Freedom. Is there anywhere in particular you want to send people, or where else can people reach out to you?
Yeah. So, Your Journey to Financial Freedom, a step by step guide to achieving wealth and happiness. You can go to yourjourneytofinancialfreedom.com. It's a long URL, but you can do it. Your
It's
Journey to
memorable.
Financial Freedom.com. And you can see all the places to buy it, but bookshop.org to support your local bookstores, all the big retailers, Amazon, Target, Barnes and Nobles. Walk into your local bookstore and ask them if they have it. If they don't have it, your library, you can request it at your library, and online. It's going to be on all audio forms. And I did the audiobook, so that's exciting.
Very
And then
cool.
I'm on all social media at Journey to Launch.
Wonderful. So good to see you. Thanks for coming on and congrats again.
Thanks so much, Brad, for having me back on the show.